I want to welcome Ken Blackwell to our LDN group. He's going to give us a really good tool that I've taken the assessment and it really is terrific. So I hope you all will consider getting involved in it. It gives you a lot of good information. Ken, go ahead.
Well, first, thanks, Bill, and pleasure to be here today. And it's really awesome to see a lot of old friends here today as well. And yeah, we're gonna dive into an area that I've been getting more and more involved in the last couple of years and using in all parts of my practice. And so I'm gonna share my screen here. I think that should work. And it's the field of neuroaxiology. And study of value. And yeah, there is an assessment that goes with it. I'm going to take today though, and since I think folks are at a level where it might be more valuable actually to expand this a little bit and think more at a little bit of a higher level. So that's where I'm going to take it, kind of how we can have impact across the organization. So where does neuroaxiology come from? Well, there's the sort of the neuro side of things, the neuroscience. And in my coaching practice for the last 20 years or so, I have been deeply involved with looking at the connections between neuroscience and how it works for training, coaching, development in general. I started studying with David Rock, who's the head of the Neuro Leadership Institute these days. Back pre-Neuro Leadership Institute days, we were taking some look at what some of the research that was happening and how to integrate it into the development work that we're doing. And we're finding out more and more and more every day, every year. We've found out more in the last 25 years than we've really known about the human brain in all of human history before that. And then the axiology part of this is from a fellow named Dr. Robert Hartman, who some of you might know as the formulator of the 401k. He's not an economics guy. He was a mathematician first and foremost, but studied the study of value and how we recognize and think about value. And so he started off in the 1930s. He was born in Germany and saw really how well evil was being organized and how it was using it. And he thought there must be a way to better organize good and be able to use that and make a more positive impact in the world. So he developed what some of you may have come across already, the Hartman Values Profile. We're going to dive into that a little bit more as we get through the day here, talking about those three domains there. And it's that piece of thinking about it, right? The Hartman Values Profile, that is the profile that Bill was referring to. Axiology has its own version of that. We call it the VQ profile, kind of like IQ, EQ. We have VQ for values quotient, right? Your values intelligence. And at the end of today, I'll actually have an offer. If you want to grab a screen code, you can grab a free intro profile, and we'll have a little talk about it afterwards. So it's the marriage of these two areas, right? The brain science and the value science that brings us to what we want to talk about today, which is how to impact performance. And so we're going to talk about how the VQ profile can really help us measure our thinking, because it's our thinking that drives our personality, our behaviors, our performance, right? So many of the things that we are dealing with in terms of other profiles, assessments, and things, they are dealing with the leaves of the tree, right? Very few things get down to the roots. And so what I love about the process of axiology, the science of axiology, particularly the VQ profile, being able to give us a view into the thinking that's going on here, the roots of what's actually happening. A colleague of mine, a couple of colleagues have written a book called The Central Question. Peter Demarest and Harvey Schoof. If you're interested in more of this and you're more of a book reader, encourage you to get that. We're going to talk about what that central question is a little bit later. But it's a lovely book, easy read. Highly encourage you to grab that. And so the field that they have developed through axiogenics, two parts of it, I guess, where we talk about it being a neuroaxiological cognitive remodeling technology, which is quite a mouthful. but NCRT for short. But it's using this combination of brain science and axiology to get at how we're thinking and to reframe that, to remodel it, to use this understanding to approach the world a little bit differently and make that tweak that can be the difference between, sort of your B game, kind of your base, and your A game, being at your best absolute thinking. And have a process that runs along with that called Valuegenic Self-Leadership. That is our training program to help folks be able to understand and integrate all of that and then apply it to some of the challenges that they face. As we go through today, too, we've got such a small, intimate group. Shout out if you've got a question. I'm going to try and keep my eye on the screen there, but feel free to come off a mute and toss out a question as you get it. The core understanding that we have with axiogenics is that value perception is really the driving force of the human mind and the human spirit, right? As we value something, we think it has high value, it has utility, we are drawn to it, it attracts us. For those things that we don't think have value or can actually take it from us, we avoid it. And for things that kind of in the middle, yeah, we have a lot of apathy, right? And it's a truism that people only do what they perceive has value in doing, right? We pursue a relationship because we perceive that it has value. We avoid maybe jumping into a training program if we don't think it's going to have value for us. We don't attend an event if we don't think it's going to have value. So it is this perception of value that drives our behavior. And that's sort of the source of axiogenics' view on the world here. Now, our perception of value is really completely subjective. But there is a way of objectively of looking at value, the actual value of something, and that's the work that Robert Hartman did. That's part of the formal study of axiology, the mathematical study of axiology, is developing that hierarchy of value. But our perception, our subjective perception, is where things can run into problems. So let's dive into that through a question here, and I'm going to ask you to come off a mute and answer this for me. If we look at this picture of a chair here, is this a good chair? Tell me, is this a good chair?
Not for sitting.
Not for sitting, right? Yes. And why is it not a good chair for sitting, Casey?
Because you will fall onto the floor.
Yes, because it's missing something, right?
Missing a
It's
leg.
missing legs, right?
Oh,
A chair with
legs.
one leg, no good. So Hartman came up with this phraseology to help us understand what the definition of good is. And this is something worth grabbing. And he said that something is good to the degree that it has all the attributes required to fulfill its purpose. It has all the attributes required to fulfill its purpose. So we might look at this plane and say, yeah, I think it doesn't quite have all the attributes. It looks like it's a little broken down. It maybe needs some repairs here. It's a plane, but it's maybe not a good plane. This car looks like it has what it needs, right? We think about the attributes a good car has, wheels, seats, an engine that runs. We can also apply this to more systemic things like an organization's mission, vision, and values. Right? There are things that can have attributes that help it fulfill its purpose, and we can say, well, that's either a good set of mission, vision, values or not. It's all defined by the purpose. We really need to get clear about what the purpose is to understand what attributes are necessary to fulfill that. And as we look at people, we can ask some of the same questions, right? Like, what are the attributes these people need to fulfill their purpose? And that's one of the things the study of axiology and the VQ profile can get us, is understanding, if I understand my purpose better, then I can understand the attributes I might need to fulfill that purpose. So if we throw this to our world, right, as L&D professionals, what's the fundamental purpose of training, coaching, mentoring, leadership? Well, we might say that it is to unlock, unleash, develop people's knowledge, wisdom, potential, right? Help them maximize their ability to achieve their individual and organizational goals, right? That's the purpose of it. Secondary question is it working, right? Is it happening? Does training have the attributes required to fulfill its purpose here? There's a correlation between, right, engagement, culture, and individual and organizational performance, and how all of those come together. You're I'm sure all familiar with Gallup, right, and the study that they do on engagement, and we've got some data here. And if we think about how we as L&D professionals might be trying to impact this, there's a whole host of best practices. I do most of those. You probably do most of those as well, right? Everything from, coaching, training, doing team building exercises, different types of assessments. There's a ton out there that we're doing, and the question is, so is it working? I mean, if we look at the data, let's see here. One of the amazing things, scary things, awful things, is that we look at over the last 20 years worth of data from Gallup anyway. Doesn't seem like things are really changing much. They vary a little bit, but our total number of unengaged folks keeps bouncing around 70%. And if you look at the overlay there of the amount of money that organizations are spending on a yearly basis to try and impact that through some of these mainstream best practices, they're spending a lot of money, and it's not really seeming to have much of an effect. So Hogan certified guy myself, had just did a study about a year and a half ago, and they asked CEOs and employees both some questions. They asked CEOs, does your leadership development have a clear impact on performance? Only 10% said yes. They asked if they have a strong leadership bench. Only 11% said yes. Developing talent is my number one concern. Yeah, more like 2/3 there, right? Are said it's an important thing. So it's important, but they're not there yet. When they asked employees, the same thing. Nearly 2/3 said, I feel alienated and disengaged. Again, another 2/3 said, I'd rather see my boss fired than get a raise myself. That's scary. And my immediate boss is the worst part of my life. 67% said, yeah, that's true. That's just unbelievably crazy, right? So something's broken right now. Something's not quite working, right? We're not able to close the gap between all of these practices that we have and actually seeing the end result. So I believe it's because too many of these initiatives are focused on the leaves of the tree and not on the roots, right? We need to really get to the roots. We need to get to people's thinking to actually have a significant and lasting impact on their performance, right? We're trying to kind of do it backwards in many respects. So it is this process of getting to the thinking first, right? And then, asking ourselves, right, if we're doing all of these other processes here, do they have all the attributes required to fulfill their purpose? Well, data would suggest probably not, right? They're missing something. So we need to be able to shift what we're doing a bit, right? And I believe it's to shift into focusing more on the thinking part of this equation than the tree and the leaves. We actually have done a project we completed and working for the last couple of years with a national construction firm. We're just about to start with a regional healthcare system, applying valuegenic principles, right? Applying axiology to what they do, top to bottom in the organization. And the construction company, you can see here's their actual data of where they were with this, tracking along with every other organization for a while, and then you see the impact of taking a value-genic approach to how they lead, how they operate as a company. Engagement shot up, employee turnover dropped. And HR folks there will tell you that the 4% turnover is about the right 4% that are moving out. That they are 100% on time with project delivery and budget and spec. It is just unbelievable. I grew up the son of a plumber working in the construction industry, and that's just unheard of that things are being delivered at that level. And through the pandemic is when most of this has been happening. And through that time, they were able to double in size in terms of their revenue and have been 4 years running now as a best place to work. So this can work, right? This approach of using neuroaxiology can work. We've seen it, and we're starting to see it as, again, we're working with this health system. We're just in the early stages, but we're starting to see leadership shift and change. So the thought I have for you today, right, is to take this yourself, right, to be the SME here, right, to be the subject matter expert, and to think about how you can drive lasting, significant change in an organization and impact their performance through impacting people's thinking. And so we have to change how we approach things a little bit and tweak some of the paradigms that we've had, and reassess a little bit, right? So some of the things, words down at the bottom here, are things we're going to be talking about. But it's making some relatively small changes, but important changes in our approach. And again, it's shifting to this understanding how the thinking is happening that is then going to drive the actual performance. So some things about this approach that I really appreciate. One is that it doesn't matter what the industry is. It doesn't matter what the level the person is. It's really universal. It's logical. It's based in some science, right? The formal axiology that Hartman was sort of the founder of is the underpinnings of this. It's actually really hard to argue when you look at the data. And it just innately makes sense to people. So as you're sharing this information with people, it just connects, right? And in my experience, it works. Had a coaching session this morning with someone and got a note literally a half hour before I got on here today that they were saying it's been one of those days where, yeah, I really need to bring my A game, and what we talked about this morning and having this more axiogenic, this more value-genic approach has just got me through the day. So because it's science-based, it can also help get rid of some of the fear and skepticism that comes along with it as well, right? So there's a 6-step process. I'm going to try and get through this real quick and open it up to questions. And as again, if you've got questions throughout, I'll offer that out. But 6 steps to get through or to become the SME yourself and be able to have that more organizational impact with your clients as you're doing all the work that you're doing. And one of the first is being able to help them understand this principle of value perception, that there is both objective value and subjective value, and how it's driving everything that people are doing, right? It is the motivating factor for everyone. People only do what they perceive has value in doing. If you think about perhaps the worst thing that you've ever done in your life, right? The most awful, most despicable thing you've ever done in your life. In the moment you did it, I would say that you probably thought that was the best thing to do in that moment, right? It's why we do anything, right? So even when we're doing something that maybe later on we think, that wasn't so nice, or I wouldn't do that again, it was because at that moment we thought that was the most valuable thing we could possibly do. And it's true for everyone all the time, right? People do what they perceive having value in doing, and they avoid that which doesn't. We also need to share the definition of good, right? That something is good to the degree that it has all the attributes required to fulfill its purpose. So when we think about doing anything, ultimately it's about the value that is created, generally speaking, not just for the value that we get, right? And so that value-genic mindset is, how can we create the greatest value? not only for ourselves, but our organization, for our coworkers. And there's a question that we can ask before we start anything that can help get us there. And that's what we call the central question. And it's, what choice can I make and action can I take in this moment to create the greatest net value? Now, we often kind of go to like greatest net value for me, right? But it's more than that, right? The net here is way bigger. It's all things considered for everyone involved, right? Both short and long term. And when I first got exposed to this question, this was probably the thing that hit me the biggest, right? So if I think about the net of things, yeah, I've got myself to think of. I've got others to think of. What is going to create the greatest net value in this moment? And the in this moment part of it as well, right? We can make a different judgment later. We could have maybe made a different judgment in the past. But in this moment, right, with knowing what I know, everything that I've got available to me, what can I do to create the greatest net value? So what is value, right? There is the formal axiological understanding of this, right? If you want to get into the mathematics of it, the Hartman Institute is a group of folks who get together. I was at their conference here earlier in the year, and there's a lot of math to it, a lot of science to it, people way smarter than me. But from their standpoint, the answer to what is value is that the greater the complexity of attributes in any given thing, the greater the value. A perhaps more practical use or definition for us is that the greater the capacity to enhance the quality of life, the greater the value. So if we think about three things, right? We think about a car, we think about a family unit, we think about a paper clip. Which of these has the greatest capacity to enhance quality of life? Throw it to the group here. Somebody come off of mute. Tell me, which one of these has the greatest capacity to enhance the quality of life?
Family.
Family, of course, right? Yes, absolutely, right? A paper clip has utility, right? It's good for holding paper together, but that's about it. And if you're might enhance your quality of life a little bit. A car is pretty amazing and awesome, and it can, do lots of things for you. But family, people, right, really have the ability, almost an unlimited ability, an infinite ability, to enhance the quality of life through relationships, through help, support, right, all of that. So this actually mirrors the Hartman value hierarchy that he created. I mean, very clear that families are more important than paper clips. So we put these three things into three dimensions. The systemic, and if with systemic, we think concepts, rules, policies, traffic right of way, right, speed limits, attendance policies, all of that falls within the world of the systemic. Intrinsic, things we have, things that we use, tools, right? And then the intrinsic level, people primarily, but also things like love, joy, right? Quality of life sits up here. And they all can build to one another, right? Even though systemic things have the least amount of value, doesn't mean that they don't have any value, right? Rules of the road are awesome. They keep us from crashing into one another. Speed limits keep us from going too fast, right? That's awesome. But when we misvalue things, right? When we put the value of, say, an attendance policy over the needs of someone to care for their family, that's when things start to get a little screwy, right? We start to say, there's something not quite right here. So the purpose of systemic things in this hierarchy of value is to help make the things, the extrinsic, more effective, right? More efficient. The extrinsic things, ultimately, their goal is to help enhance the intrinsic definition, right? Like having a car is awesome because then we can get places. It's easier to get food. It's easier to get to the doctor, to visit other people, right? So those intrinsic things can help enhance the intrinsic level. But what's the purpose of the intrinsic dimension? Well, for our purposes, we say the valuegenic purpose of the intrinsic level is to do some of the things that we'd want to do as learning and development professionals, right? Create higher engagement and productivity, improve talent retention and attraction, be able to build and enhance collaboration and innovation. Basically everything that leads to greater performance, success, happiness, quality of life, right? And so this hierarchy of value is a way for us to build ultimately better quality of life. And it's also true that things that violate that hierarchy limit, diminish, or destroy value. And, if we think about the return for work debate that's been going on, here it is, right? We have executives saying, you need to return to the office. Why? Well, you just need to. It's what we do, right? Very systemic kind of approach. And then they're trying to ladle on other rationales for coming in, most of which are based in, some presenteeism, I think, and some basic lack of trust. If we really were looking at things, we'd look at a work policy that had the intrinsic values much more upfront and in person, right? So being able to care for children, be able to have a work-life balance, right? All of those things would be at the intrinsic level. But when we're prioritizing systemic things, that's when things get out of whack. I've got a friend who works for a major pharma company, and there's an attendance policy. You need to be there, half the time in person. So every 5 out of 10 days you need to be in the office badging in, right? And if you're not badging in, they come looking for you. It's a misvaluation of what should be another order of things. All that makes sense so far? Seems nodding head, shaking good.
Yeah.
So, there is some mathematics behind it, and you can certainly dive into that if you want. But the core of it basically is that, it ought to be people first, right? And there is the math and science behind it that says, yes, that is true. We know it as L&D professionals. We know the importance of putting people first over some of these things. But there's actually math and science behind it that bolsters that position. So this is a scientific fact that we deal with. And when we do, we can measure it. We can see that there's actually better performance. The more that you focus on the people, on the intrinsic dimension, the greater performance you're going to see in an organization. And organizations that go the route of instead misprioritizing the systemic, you don't see that gain in performance. So we can apply this also to, looking at constitutions, look at bylaws, look at mission, vision, value statements. We can approach it from the same perspective. What's the purpose? Everything has to be purpose driven here, because with purpose, then we understand what are the attributes needed to fulfill that purpose. So we might be asking, questions of our clients to trigger some of that, right? Because we know generationally, for instance, that, the younger folks are looking for organizations that have a purpose, that have a why, right? This is the Simon Sinek approach to things, right? We're looking for those things that go beyond just the paycheck. And organizations that have a purpose-driven reason for existing, tend to attract better talent, tend to be more profitable. So we might pose some questions like, asking our clients, what's the greater value that we're creating here? What do we solve as an organization? What sort of difference do we make in the world? How are we enhancing the quality of life, not only for our customers, but our employees as well? What would be the difference we make in the world if we're able to fulfill our purpose? What are some of the principles and expectations that we need to have that will guide our decisions going forward, to make sure that we're making the right decisions when we are faced with it? We should be posing some of these questions to our clients. Good questions to ask of ourselves as well, thinking about our own individual businesses or the role that we're in an organization. What is the purpose of the company that you run, right? Whether it's a thought practice, or whether it's, a training delivery firm, whatever, what is the purpose, and do you have the attributes required to fulfill that purpose? So a thing that I have found super helpful with some of my coaching clients is pulling out a guiding principle of valuegenic leadership, and that is the difference between responsibility and accountability. So going to the root of the word, responsibility, right? It's our ability to make choices and take actions that create greater net value, right? Asking that central question. And it is a thing that is present and future focused, right? It is not focused on the past. It is from here going forward. What choices in the future can I make? What actions in the future can I take, right? That will allow me to grow, that will allow me to create greater value. And that starts then with accountability, which is the backward-looking piece of this, right? It is to look at what happened. What did I do? What did I not do? What were the things that happened? And to look at it clearly without blame, shame, or guilt. What did I do in the past that led me to where I am, right? And then making different choices going forward. So being able to clearly account for what has happened in the past, right? Learn from it will allow us to then grow into the future. And I work with a lot of clients where these two terms get used sort of interchangeably. It causes a lot of confusion. People aren't really sure what they're talking about responsibility when really they mean accountability, and accountability when they mean responsibility. But to have this distinction of accountability lies only in the past and responsibility lies in the future has been a very helpful thing to get people be able to ask and accurately answer that central question. It's what we sometimes refer to as artful leadership, right? So if we can combine accountability and responsibility, we can get transformability, right? We can get the ability to transform ourselves, transform our organizations, our businesses, right? Our communities. And there are some principles, right? First and foremost, we have to think about the interior first. Don't do it with any blame or shame in the past. Being able to look very clearly at the choices we've made, right? And be able to draw the wisdom out of that and make more responsible choices in the future. And explore those situations. What contributed to those results? What were some of the triggers that led me to that place? And once we understand what those triggers were and are making some different choices, then it's all about reinforcing those new choices and celebrating them. So responsibility starts with accountability. Makes sense so far? Questions? Checking in with folks here. All right, great. So partnership. We're all partners in this. If you're an L&D professional, you're not doing it alone. You are working in the context of an organization through their hierarchical leadership. You're working in conjunction with their HR or talent management department. Everybody has a role in it. If we think just even about our communities, right, we all have a role to play in enhancing the quality of life in our communities. And I believe that it is this valuegenic mindset that is at the core of it all, right? This idea of understanding our drivers based on how we're valuing things that is going to get us there. And understand, we need to be there for each other. I know we've got a couple members of the National Speakers Association on right now, and it is an organization that really does support one another. Speaking is a lonely business. You tend to be doing a lot of it by yourself, and the warmth that is there in NSA and the support is fantastic, and it enables us to do some of that work that we're out there in the world doing and changing people's lives. But it starts with having each other's back and being able to have that support. So we all need to do our part in moving things forward. And so if we can have those good, strong partnerships, it enables us to build trust, right? That enhances engagement, and engagement, as we've seen, right, is the pathway to higher performance. And so thinking about our best practices again, right? And how they're not really working, you know, in today's world, right? We're not seeing the impact of them, certainly in the engagement. Perhaps if we can apply, you know, this value-genic approach to things, perhaps we can have an impact. And so there's a framework that might be helpful, and I'm going to just load this because there's a lot of build in this slide. But it is looking first and foremost at the purpose and attributes of the topic that we're working with, you know, the skill or the competency. You know, why are we doing it? If we're doing a session on conflict management, what is the purpose of that session? And then what are the attributes of a really good session on conflict management, right? And being able to bring in some of these core ideas of a value-genic mindset, like the driver of value, to help people understand why they're going to be motivated to do some of the things that they want to do. Understanding what the relevance is, obviously, right? If it's not relevant, if it doesn't have value, people are not going to get there. And to help folks, you know, be able to develop, you know, some aspirational goals here. What's the benefit of doing this work, right? We need to have enough of an aspirational goal, enough of a gain to create value for doing the work in the first place. We have some forms in axiogenics. We have a way of looking at an aspirational goal as things we want to be more and things we want to be less. Right? We call that sort of the difference between our A game and our B game. So being able to minimize those things we want to be less and to be more of the things that are going to help us get to our aspirational goal. And then connecting those to the habits that are going to help carry that through, right? But it starts with the thinking and then building the practices and the habits, those daily habits that are going to make a difference, and integrating all of that such that it gets reinforced, happens again and again and again, gets that feedback going there. So we can look at this sort of another way too. It's first starting with the organization, what their goal and purpose is, the team down to the individual role, what that individual employee's perspective is, and then, you know, doing that over and over and over again. So just kind of capturing all of that for you there, right? The 6 parts of this are understanding the principle of value perception, what the definition of good is, fostering that value-genic mindset, starting to talk about the values centered leading thinking, being able to look at documents, again, through that lens of a value-genic mindset. What are some of the non-negotiable principles of that, right? Having the mindset, the accountability, the responsibility, the partnership, that hopefully leads to some artful leadership, and then this NCRT process to get you there. So threw a lot at you there. Questions about any and all of this, and then we can kind of go off on tangents as we will here, keeping an eye on time. What sort of questions might I have spurred or caused you to think of?
And how does this play into thinking styles? If you take a thinking style assessment, you know, like NBI or some of those, you know, with left brain, right brain, abstract, concrete, did any of those things come into play here?
You know, for me, the disconnect has been, and this is true. And listen, I'm a big DISC person, right? Use DISC a lot, but it is up in that realm of sort of personality, right? It's kind of the trunk of the tree. And so it's not quite getting down below. Like having that label doesn't lead you to what you do with it. So axiogenics, the profile, and I've got a code I'll throw up in a second here for you guys to get a free profile from me, helps us understand where our thinking is in alignment with that objective hierarchy of value and where it might be astray, right? Where it might be misaligned. We refer to those things as biases, right? Cognitive biases, because they can get in the way. They can be the things that get us. The cognitive assets are the ways to actually think through the problem. The other piece with any instrument that's going to create a label is that we then have to think about changing ourselves, right? If that's not a helpful label to have, or that's not a thoughtful style to have in a given instance, having to think about changing ourselves is tough. What I love about axiogenics is that you already have cognitive assets. They're already there. And all you need to do is apply them. And it's a truism that you can't be both in your A game and your B game at the same time, right? You can't be both in a bias and in your asset at the same time. You can be only one or the other. So if you are using an asset, right, a cognitive asset to think you're in your A game, you automatically are not in your B game. And then you're able to then approach and look at the world and make those choices and take those actions that are really going to leave you there or lead you to where you need to be. And the biases are not, a terrible thing. They're fine most of the time. But in the moments that matter, right, when it really counts, we've got that important meeting, or there's a relationship that we need to build, or there's that critical decision, to be able to shift and really make sure we're using our cognitive assets in that and viewing the world as accurately as we can. Yeah, then we get somewhere. But some of these instruments, like I said, are up in the trunk of the tree, right? So they're not the leaves, but they're the trunk of the tree. It's really more helpful to get down into the roots and the thinking of, so what's actually happening here, and tweaking that. Because sometimes those instruments can just get you to the edge and then not quite get there. What other questions do folks have?
I have a crazy question.
Please, I love crazy questions.
All right, so how do you sell this? How do you get people to buy in?
So, it's depending on the person, right? But there's a couple things. One is, if people are open to and more attracted to science-based approaches, this is one, right? We go back to value, right? People go towards what they perceive value in. One of the most powerful ways is to actually show them, right? To do an intro profile and actually have them take them through a real life situation and see it play out. So the client that I was working with this morning, a couple of weeks ago, we went through a game versus B game worksheet, right? We laid out one of the scenarios where she gets triggered, where she finds herself in her B game, not doing her best thinking, approaching things maybe a bit too emotionally and getting stuck, right? And then applied one of her cognitive assets that came out of the profile to that very same situation, and how she might look at that situation a bit differently, and what then the reactions would be, and what would be the net result of that. And then had her go do that, right? She actually took that out into the world, had meetings to go to, was faced with a lot of last minute projects that came her way that in the past were paralyzing for her. And with a different mindset, a different way of thinking about it, she's like, oh, yeah, I've dealt with this before. I can deal with this now. I'm going to make the best decision I can. And even though it was a last minute, one of those crazy projects that came her way, she was getting through it. And like I said, I heard from her again this afternoon, like, yes, this has just been one of those days where I've been having to do that repeatedly, and I'm getting through it, where it was really causing her to get stuck before. So I guess ultimately it's being able to show people is the best way that I've had.
Mm-hmm.
Don't think that's a crazy question at all. I think that's a really good question. Any others? So you all got phones, I know. So you can either use your phone, grab the QR code, or you can go to the URL right there, talk.ac/Ken Blackwell, and put in the code VQ profile. That should bring you to a link. Ask you to give me some feedback there on the session, what you thought. It always helps me improve and grow as I go through. Myself being accountable for what I've done here, and then responsible for making it better in the future. If you can give me some of that feedback, and then you'll be brought to a link that'll enable you to take the profile. And when you do, there'll be a link there. You can connect up and set up a session with me. We can go through and do a free 1 hour debrief of the profile, and you have a chance to see, your thinking at work, right? And it'll give you one of your cognitive assets, a couple of your cognitive biases, and we'll play with this a little bit and see how it works out for you practically. Awesome.
And I'm shocked that no one has questions. This is usually the noisiest group I know. So is anybody sitting back? Now's your time.
Well, I've thrown a lot at them, so
Yeah.
they're processing a lot, and I'm sure there'll be questions later. And if there are, please reach out. Again, using this QR code is a great way. It should give you my social on there too as you go through. And if not, you can reach me at ken@inclaritas.com. So Inclaritas is INKLARITAS.com. So ken@inclaritas.com. Be happy to answer questions. And for those of you on the recording who are watching this later, you may have thought like, gosh, I wish I could have asked Ken this question. Please drop me a line. Be glad to respond to you.
And thank you for a fantastic presentation. Really appreciate it. It looks
pleasure.
like a really valuable tool. I had taken it actually a while ago. Somebody was doing it at a coaching session. And it's really interesting, and again, a lot to it. So thanks again for explaining it to us, and your offer is fantastic as well. So thank you again.
Yeah, appreciate it. It's so awesome to see so many familiar faces and friends in the audience here today. So and there's probably more there on the recording that I don't even realize that I know. So
Right.
you weren't there today. Hello. Hope to see you again soon.
Okay, I'm going to end the recording, and then we can shoot the breeze.